Welcome, Torah Tuesday, Exodus chapters 3 and 4. At the end of chapter 2, Moses has become an adult. Remember, he was raised in Pharaoh's house, but somehow he has become aware that he is a Hebrew, an Israelite, and he sees the bitter treatment of one of his fellow Hebrews by the Egyptians. And so he actually kills the Egyptian slave master who has been brutalizing one of his fellow Hebrews, and he buries this man in the sand. But apparently, word gets out, and Pharaoh hears and wants to kill Moses. And so Moses flees from Egypt to a place called Midian. While he's in Midian, he sits by a well. And if you've been reading the story in Genesis, you will know that when you sit by a well, you tend to meet your wife. It happened for Isaac, he meets Rebecca at the well. It happens for Jacob, he meets Rachel at the well. And now it happens for Moses, he meets his wife, Zipporah, at the well. Moses and his wife, Zipporah, they have a child, Gershon, which means foreigner there, because now Moses recognizes that he has become a foreigner in a foreign land. And he lives in Midian with Zipporah and her family and herds the flocks of his father-in-law. And then towards the end of chapter 2, the camera focuses back on Egypt. Pharaoh has now died, and Israel, in their slavery, has cried out to God. And God has heard their cry. It says that God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And so God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. This means God is going to do something. The situation is not going to stay as it is. God has heard, he has remembered his promise, and he is concerned. So what's he going to do about it? Well, there we go, chapter 3. It's one of the most important chapters in this whole story about the Exodus. It's probably one of the most famous stories in the Bible. Moses is tending his father-in-law's flock, and he finds himself on the side of Mount Horeb. Now, you might not remember this, but Mount Horeb is also known by another name, Mount Sinai. This is a very important mountain that Moses has found himself on. This chapter calls it the Mountain of God. And this is going to become a very important place. While he is there, Moses sees that a bush is burning, but it's not burning up. And so he goes to have a closer look, and as he approaches it, a voice calls out to him, "Moses, Moses." And we have God speaking to Moses in the burning bush. You know the story, it's famous. Now, the content of the conversation is actually really instructive and helpful. Basically, the conversation is shaped by God's initial instruction to Moses. That's the first thing. And then Moses has 5 questions for God. You could call them questions or you could call them objections. But basically, that's how it goes. God's initial instruction goes like this. "I've heard the cry of Israel, so I've come down to rescue them and bring them up into the land of milk and honey." Basically, God is delivering on his promise. And so he says to Moses, "Moses, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people out of Egypt. You're the one I'm using." That's what God says to Moses. Moses' first objection or question is in verse 11. "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And God's response is, "I will be with you." So Moses, he does this, I guess, natural thing of saying, "Well, who am I?" And God says, "Moses, it's not about you. It's about me. I will be with you." And that's how this will be done. And so Moses objects again. Okay, maybe he's seeking a bit of clarification here. Verse 13. "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you.' And they ask me, 'What is his name?' And Moses says, 'What am I meant to tell them?'" And this is really important because this is where God reveals his personal name to Moses. Now, the importance of this name, in our Bibles, it's initially he says, "I am who I am," which is the verb, I believe Travis told me once that it's hayah in Hebrew. Hayah, I am who I am. or I will be who I will be. But the way that we tend to use it is actually in its other form, which is Yahweh. Yahweh. And so God is revealing his personal name here. This is like when you meet the king and the king says, or you meet the queen and the queen says, "Don't call me your royal highness. You can call me Elizabeth." This is a very important scene. God is giving his personal name. No longer should he just be called by the title of God. He is going to be called by his name. And it's important because the name Yahweh, the God, it's going to be forever associated with the deliverance that he has promised. Yahweh is the God who is, and he is the God who hears the cry of his people and delivers them from oppression. That's what Yahweh will be known for. And that is the purpose of this story, is to build a character around the person of God as the one who hears the cries of his people and who delivers them from oppression. This is how God is revealing himself in Exodus. And then Moses gets to his third question or objection. What if they do not believe me or listen to what I say? Or listen to me when I say that, and then they say that the Lord did not appear to you. And so God gives him 3 signs that he can do. The first one is the staff that he's holding, because remember, he's a shepherd. God says that staff will turn into a snake. So Moses is going to become the snake handler. He's going to be the one who controls the snake. That's really interesting when you think about Genesis chapter 3 and the serpent, and then the fact that Pharaoh in Exodus chapter 1, he was spoken of in the same way that the serpent was spoken of. So Moses is the one who can handle the snake. He's also given this leprosy sign, and finally he's told that if he takes water from the Nile and he pours it onto ground, it will turn to blood. But again, the point of this question and response is God is saying, it's not about you, Moses. It's actually me who is doing this. And so here are some of my signs that I will do so that people will believe you. And then we get to the fourth one. Moses says, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and tongue." See, Moses, again, he focuses on his own failing. And God's response is intended to redirect Moses' gaze from himself and his own inadequacies toward God. God says, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, and I will help you to speak and will teach you what to say." To summarize God's response in rhetorical form, he basically says, I make everything. I'm in charge of everything. If I choose you to do it, then I will make you able to do it. That's a pretty amazing response. Moses says finally, and this is his last objection, "Pardon your servant, please send someone else." So at the very thought, this is where Moses, he gets down to it. Okay, enough excuses. I just don't want to. I don't want to. And when he says this, the Lord's anger burns against Moses. Now, this is important because in the revelation of God's character, we have the God who is, we have the God who delivers from oppression, but also we have God's anger. God's anger is a part of his character. Now, we'll come back to this. This is important, but this is a part of who God is. So God says he will provide Aaron to help him. Now, this seems like a concession. Moses could have done this alone, but since he is unwilling to do it alone, God has given him someone else, Aaron, and now they will do it together. And this is where the conversation ends. Moses heads home, and he takes his wife and kids and begins to make his way to Egypt with the staff of God in his hand, the staff that will become emblematic of God's power with Moses. Okay, what can we draw from these very important chapters? Well, firstly, God's character and his name, they are associated with deliverance from evil. That's the purpose of this story. God's name, his character, is about deliverance from evil. And so it's no surprise that Jesus, who is the image of the invisible God, the exact representation of his being, Jesus would ultimately deliver his people from their sins and from the power of the evil one, because this is what God is about. And the other thing that we can take from this, I think, is that we also, just like Moses, we tend to focus on us, our inadequacies, our skills, or our lack of skills. So I'm sure as you read this chapter, you can see yourself in Moses. His responses probably sound like the way that you sound sometimes. But here's the thing. It's the thing that Moses needed to learn. It's the thing that we need to learn as well. If God has set out to do something through us, it is him doing it, not us. He is using us, but he is ultimately the one who's achieving his purpose. And God achieves his purposes. If you've learned anything from 50 chapters of Genesis and 2 chapters of Exodus, it's that God achieves the thing he sets out for. So for those of you who are involved in ministry, in kids ministry, youth ministry, uni ministry, maybe you're just trying to raise your kids to know Jesus, this is a reminder that we need to not trust in ourselves or think that it comes down to us, but to trust in God. He will be with us. He is the God who is. He is the God who does not want, so who does what he promises. And so we should trust in him. We should rely on him and pray to him. See ya.